Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I've been working in the National Health Service for 26 years, and I would like to say at the outset that I strongly believe that healthcare should be provided free of charge to all at the point of delivery. 26 years ago, the NHS was an exciting place in which to work. But since then, I'm afraid to say that I have seen the steady decline and the decay of the service. Across the country, doctors and nurses that I speak to are demoralized and depressed because they know that whatever they do, they cannot achieve much within the current structure of the NHS. For many years, all of us believed that the problem within the NHS was simply a lack of funding. If only we had enough money, we were sure the problems of the NHS would be solved. In 1998, the total expenditure on the NHS was 45 billion. Within 10 years, the expenditure on the NHS will more than have doubled to 109 billion. That is like creating a whole new NHS from scratch. But despite this enormous increase in money, the extra benefit for individual patients remains very small indeed. It is true, as Lord Hunt said, that virtually no one now waits longer than 9 months for their surgery, and this is a great improvement. What we are not told is that a lot of this improvement is simply playing with the figures, and that the average wait for surgery has not reduced at all, and in some cases, such as for hip operations, the average waiting time has in fact increased. How is it that while our spending on health is rapidly approaching that of Europe, countries such as France, Germany, and Switzerland have no waiting lists at all? As a cancer specialist, I am embarrassed and saddened that in 2004, we have nearly the worst survival rates for cancer in Europe and far worse than the United States. A recent analysis of the performance of the whole of the National Health Service, published in the British Medical Journal in September last year, showed that the United Kingdom ranked 18th out of 19 developed countries. So why is it that the NHS remains so poor despite the unimaginable amount of extra money that is being poured into it? The reason is surprisingly simple. The NHS is the only health service in the developed world where the patient is not the consumer. In other countries, as well as in the private sector in the UK, the patient has the power of the consumer, and that is an enormous power. In the NHS, the power rests with managers who know that they will be judged by their success in achieving targets that the government needs to make good headlines in these tabloids we've been talking about, rather than by improving patient care. Their salaries and their career prospects are totally dependent on achieving those targets. So bizarrely, in our health service, the managers regard the government as the consumer. The hard truth is that no one in management in the National Health Service is particularly concerned about patient care. That's a very hard statement, but it happens to be true. They are concerned about meeting their targets and concerned there are no nasty stories in the newspapers. I work, I confess, in the private sector as well as the National Health Service. In the private sector, a chief executive is judged not only by running a hospital as a successful business. He or she is also judged by regular surveys taken of patient and consultant satisfaction. The chief executive is aware that the patients and the consultants are the consumers, and without satisfying their needs, he will not be in a job for long. A large part of the truckloads of money that are being poured into NHS go into funding this huge and burgeoning bureaucracy. Over the past 4 years, the number of doctors and nurses has increased by 16%, whereas the number of managers has increased by 45%. If one takes NHS managers and administrators together, there are as many managers and administrators as there are nurses, and I wonder which we would vote for. If one compares that to the private sector, there's one manager or administrator for every 5 nurses, and those figures come from the Department of Health website. The difference between management in the NHS and the private sector is profound. In the NHS, managers see their job as saving money by stopping things happening. And the amazing thing is all this extra money hasn't changed that one bit. In the private sector, a manager's job is to make things happen. And how does the NHS stop things happening? They, of course, appoint more managers. In the private sector, the patient expects to get the best treatment and expects it to be provided quickly and in a respectful manner. If they're not satisfied, they can change doctor and hospitals immediately and seamlessly. In contrast, patients in the NHS have little option but to accept long, painful, and often dangerous waits to see doctors, to have investigations, to wait for the results, and finally for the treatment. By the time they get the treatment, they are so worn down by the system, they are not in a position to question or complain about the service they received. The patient is disempowered and made impotent by the system. So what is the solution? One only has to look to Europe and ask why it is they are able to provide such a high standard of care without waiting lists in clean, state-of-the-art hospital. The difference is that in Europe, most nations have a form of social insurance as the basis of funding their health service, rather than our centralized Soviet-style 5-year plans. This means that every person is compulsorily insured, the insurance is paid by taxation or is funded by the state if the person is unemployed. By law, companies have to accept everyone, irrespective of their past medical history. No one is in the situation of not having insurance. So the principle of healthcare, free at the point of delivery, is maintained, but the fundamental difference, ladies and gentlemen, is that every patient is a consumer. They have the same freedom to change doctors and hospitals in the UK as someone with a Bupa card. And doctors and managers alike know they have to provide a high standard of care or they will no longer be in business. Until the National Health Service reinvents itself so that the patient becomes a consumer, it will remain in a seriously broken state. Thank you.
Our third speaker against the motion